A story is the shortest distance between people. When I came to live here at this retirement community in Claremont, California, Pilgrim Place, and I brought this idea of the living room dialogue to the diversity group, and I said, let's get together with local organizations to build a relationship, because we were noticing at Pilgrim Place that there were very few people of color who were residents. Pilgrim Place was always open to diversity, but aware that as residents, we needed ongoing education. We needed more personal experiences with people of color to create this welcome environment. So we reached out to the local branch of NAACP, to the local section of National Council of Negro Women, and received great reception. I think what's important here is that in order to build a community, in order to build cooperation, in order to build communication, it's necessary to create a safe space. So we developed our own way to do that. It's listening to one another, respect, confidentiality, telling your own story, not telling another person's story without their permission. And with that process, we were able to develop a trust. We started with simple stories of our families, of how we grew up. When did we first notice that race was an important component in our lives? And these stories, as we shared them in the first couple of years, actually helped to heal some relationships that people, had either with each other or with their families. And it certainly built a relationship for us. Some white people had ancestors who were slaveholders. And that was really a jolt to some of the people of color. Others knew that there were ancestors who had been enslaved. And so that's part of what created some of the healing. But I think what helped us go much deeper, and this is where I think the stories got more interesting, is when we realized the trauma that had existed both for white people and for people of color in dealing with this reality of race in our society and in the US. And so we turned to a book called My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies by Resmaa Menakem. We worked on this for 2 years. 5 to 6 people are in a circle, meeting monthly or bi-monthly, to really go deep in what people's trauma was. And what I can tell you is that some of the questions that came up that we developed as facilitators, the facilitators are 6 people of color and 6 white people, and we meet monthly. We have a system called the cyclonic exercise. You go clockwise for one question and then counterclockwise for the other. So the clockwise question is, when you think about your ancestor, who belonged and who was pushed away? And then the second question, counterclockwise, when you think about who you belong to, who do you bring close and who do you push away? And then you have a 25-minute discussion on those ancestral relationships. And so then we moved deeper. And then we asked, relating to our ancestors, clockwise the question, this would be the next time we met, maybe 2 months later, based on what was revealed in your stories with your ancestors, what are your beliefs or perception about the color of skin? And then counterclockwise, describe what you feel in your body as you share this perception or particular filter about the color of skin. And so the kind of questions that came up were, for example, to be in touch with your ancestor, to remember who was your ancestor and what does it feel like to remember that ancestor. And then each person goes around and it builds on itself. That's what develops the relationship. There's an enhancement. And then we have a discussion and anybody can talk in the group. And the whole thing lasts for about an hour. And there's no talking or questioning across the group. You pause between each person's response so that you can really take it in and let it be metabolized. But then we got into even deeper kind of questions. One of the chapters here in this book is about fragility and when a white person uses a person of color to soothe them and make them feel better about their racism. So clockwise, our question became, reflect on an incident when you used a person of another color to soothe, comfort, or protect you. Do you do so consciously or unconsciously? Was it to your or their detriment? Or was there gain or equity? You go around for 20 minutes or so on a question like that, you go deep. And by the way, by this time we were into our 3rd or 4th year of knowing one another. And others were coming in and out, but they caught on. And then counterclockwise, was the comfort or protection you asked genuinely necessary? Could you have taken care of it yourself? If you had done so, how might the outcome have been different? So yes, I know I've had experiences of feeling like I had stepped on a person of color's toes, and I would want to be soothed and assured that it was no big deal. So that would be an example of my wanting to be soothed rather than my taking responsibility by myself and not expecting, the person of color, the African American person, to take care of it for me. So that was a very, very powerful kind of cyclonic exercise we had. And I do want to say that we always start with these small groups with a half an hour of preparation. We have a conversation about it. We do the summary of what the chapter was about, for example. A couple people among our facilitators are poets, and so they write a poem on the very topic. We always have music. We have some real music lovers and music experts who find the right music for it. This was great during Zoom, especially. And then we're ready to go into the small groups. We always remind people what are the ground rules. And we always be sure that everybody feels comfortable where they're sitting and are ready to go. And after we have the hour together, then we have a half hour to debrief together as a whole group. So we come back together and what is going on for you now, going forward? What's the collective wisdom here, the collective intelligence? Where are you right now? Do you have any new experiences or insights from this? So, it really goes deep. Describe a time you felt that someone projected onto you a pain that they were avoiding. That's clockwise. And then counterclockwise, describe a time you felt someone else projected something onto you that they recognized and accepted, and you were able to move through that with integrity. So it's working on our personal understanding of our racism, but we were also dealing with what was happening in society at the time. So we had the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, and we had the COVID-19 pandemic, and then we had the uptick in police violence and violence in general. So we were needing to deal with what is the lie that lives within us. In other words, we were reflecting where society was. That was the clockwise question. And then the counterclockwise, where does wisdom live for you? And it was specifically dealing with this triple pandemic of COVID, racial violence, and racism in general. And out of that came several projects that the group decided to take on. One was visiting detainees in detention centers, immigrants, because we felt that there was a lot of racism going on within the detention centers here around the LA basin. Another one was that we worked with the Pomona Police Department. And again, my grandmother's hands talk about what's happening in the white body, what's happening in the African American or Latino body, and what's happening in the police body. So we signed on and worked for a year with the Pomona Police Department. Pomona, California is in Los Angeles County, and it's right next to Claremont, which is where Pilgrim Place is. We've done these kind of programs in schools, with Claremont colleges, with college students, even with guards in the detention center, with the Pomona Police Department. They want to know how to work better with people. They don't want to be bullies. It's just that they've never learned or been trained how to do it. But yes, the students were very much engaged and excited to be part of this, and surprised that they could actually learn something about themselves and learn something from different generations. We worked with the police department for a whole year, by the way, before we did the circle of chairs with them. It's really an ad hoc, volunteer, completely open organization of people who really want to learn and grow our understanding of racial justice and how that impacts our society today. We had a healing ceremony, which was very powerful because we had touched racial wounds, both for white people and for people of color. And so we wanted a way to help release our sorrow and our grief about some of the trauma and some of the difficult situations, especially for those, who had ancestors who had enslaved people. and the ancestors who had been enslaved. And people came up to release their burdens. If they wrote what their burden was on a piece of paper, and we had a burning bowl, they could put their burden into the burning bowl. And then we wrote letters I gathered and then sent to them 2 months later of hopes and dreams of how people were going to take that forward. And that's where a lot of the action came. We decided to do cultural competency trainings here at Pilgrim Place in order to better understand our white privilege and how that impacts staff who work here. And that was really, really an important training. And we did 2 years of cultural competency trainings as a result of this circle of chairs. I just don't think it would have happened had that not occurred, the circle of chairs. And now we're focusing on deeper things. We're just focusing on the hate that exists in our society. One of the most recent ones we did was describe the first experience as you remember feeling hate. That was clockwise. And then how did you handle the feelings in the situation you experienced? Does hate paralyze you? How can you transform hate and move toward love? Well, one African American woman said, I don't feel any hate. But by the time it was finished, she said, oh my goodness, I didn't know that I had hate inside me. And I need to be able to recognize that in order to be able to talk with somebody else who is also experiencing hate. That I think has been, one of the most important things, that as we go deep, that trauma of people of not really knowing, consciously what you've gone through, when it comes to consciousness, it can unblock a lot of emotion and grief and sorrow, and then can turn into a new possibilities of, love, I would say, because it was out of love that we did these cultural competency trainings, that we worked with the Pomona Police Department, that we actually solved problems by learning to know one another first, and then we're able to take their relationships, use their relationships to make structural or institutional changes.